Crows have been deeply intertwined with mankind's musings and depictions of the world since the beginning of time. Throughout history, folklore, and religion, whenever there's a depiction of death or the underworld, these black birds follow closely behind. But death isn't the only thing that crows are associated with across the continents. Their dark wings carry stories that have woven themselves into myth and legend, whispered and retold since the dawn of man, and no matter how much they are separated by time and space, the details remain eerily similar, almost identical. So why is it that no matter where you go, or how many millennia separate these cultures, the story always remains the same? Welcome to the Vortex, where mythology, lore, and history collide. Today, we swoop into the mysterious origins of crows in human history, and most importantly, how each continent, culture, and race seems to attribute them to the same laws every single time. Before we trip across the globe to look at man's obsession with crows, please do take a second to subscribe, click that like button, and while you're at it, tell us about how your culture, religion, or country views crows. Is it really all that surprising that crows and ravens have been singled out by humanity for their intelligence and unnerving, maybe even magical, ability to follow and predict man's actions over the centuries? They are, after all, the most intelligent bird species on the planet, consistently clocking in with the highest IQs every single time they're taken through scientific testing. Their natural curiosity and sneaky antics have led them to evolve to the point that their survival is often completely centered around human settlements. So finding crows in mythology, religion, and folklore in quite literally every corner of the planet isn't what's surprising. It's the way in which they're depicted that's so curious. Across the board, they're associated with three very specific principles. Three enigmas, born in shadow, whispered in the wind, and forged in flame. Mysteries that have plagued humanity since our very beginnings. Death, wisdom, and fire. Crows represent these three concepts of uncertainty and the unknown. Where do we go when we die? Where does intelligence come from? And who brought man's most important advancement? Fire. Some of the first depictions of crows in art date back to the ancient people who crossed the land bridge from what is now Europe to North America, approximately 10,000 years ago. Among these earliest known tribes, the raven was seen as both a trickster and a divine creator, bringing light and fire to the people, and shaping landscapes through a mix of mischief, intelligence, and perhaps even a little greed. Fast forward 5,000 years, and Asia's fascination with these black birds, creatures that seem to observe humans more intently than humans observed them, starts to rear its head in the legends of Neolithic China. Here the three-legged crow, Shan Wu, brought light to the world, just like it did 5,000 years earlier to the first Americans. This same thought was later brought across the ocean to Japan, where another three-legged crow inspired some of the earliest cornerstones of the Shinto belief, Japan's first indigenous religion. In 5000 BCE, our subjects then soared over to visit the Bantu tribes of Central Africa. Here, we see the bringers of knowledge and messages from the dead revered in art and lore. To them, crows were the messengers between the living and the ancestors on the other side, as well as bringers of wisdom, and are still, to this very day, central to themes of transformation from one phase of life to the next. Flocks of crows are regarded as an ominous sign of death approaching, so much so that in many cases, people are willing to pack up and move to another area, rather than stay where the omens of death gather. Again, wisdom and the passing of information is a strong theme with crows, but this is the first time in oral traditions that we start associating them with death specifically. Landing in 2348 BCE, crows begin their movement over to written records for the first time in the Bible. The first mention in any of the apocryphal writings is that God sent a crow down to show Cain how to bury his brother Abel. A crow appeared again, this time a raven, being the first creature Noah released from the ark to see if the floodwaters had receded enough for them to leave their confinement. The ravens brought Elijah bread to eat in the wilderness, and they played an integral part in Jesus' parables, with their role in the Islamic religion being even greater, always depicted as bringers of some unknown knowledge, or as a way to teach others wisdom. The Celts' ties to crows goes back much earlier than the written records would imply. Their belief systems weren't recorded until 700 BCE, but by that time, their culture, religion, and folklore had been embedded in the lands for thousands of years. The most famous association is as the companions of Morrigan, the goddess of war, fate, and death. She takes the form of a raven when major battles occur, and uses her flighted servants to bring souls and messages to the other world. The Welsh had Bran the Blessed, also known as Bran the Raven. He lived around 1000 BCE. This great king and warrior asked that his head be buried on the hill where the Tower of London now stands, looking out at the approaching armies. As long as his head lies there, the British Isles will be protected. Since that day, there have always been ravens kept at the top of the tower, fed mice and chicks by the Raven Master, an official title bestowed on the Warden of the Ravens by the reigning monarch. The belief that the ravens protect Britain is so strong that Charles II decreed that there must always be 6 ravens living in the tower. If ever they left or died, then London and its famous tower would fall. This tradition is taken so seriously that there are always spare ravens kept at another location to replace one if they've died of old age. The Scots have Cailleach, a hag who brings winter and death when she arrives in the form of a raven, and King Arthur was said to have turned into a raven when he died. These are just a handful of Britain's more fascinating relationships with ravens and crows, which are often at times at odds with one another. History points to ravens and crows embodying communication between the living and the dead, wisdom and protection. Yet the folklore warns of death, winter, and war. India, on the other hand, almost exclusively ties crows to the afterlife, with beliefs around their representation of those who have crossed over to the other side dating back as early as 1500 BCE. There are plenty more examples throughout history, from Greek and Roman traditions linking crows to omens and, in some cases, Apollo, to ancient Mesopotamia, where they appear in the Epic of Gilgamesh as messengers and symbols of fate, to name just a few. Topics for another time. And we can't talk crows without Odin's two, Huginn and Muninn. By the time they appear, their role is almost inevitable. One embodies thought, the other memory. And beyond those two, ravens in Norse and Viking culture were far more than just birds. They were harbingers of war, death, and fate, symbols of wisdom and knowledge, and woven deep into their myths, banners, and battlefields. Continuing on our journey, this time into the South Pacific and beyond, we find Australia's Aboriginal people, as well as the Pacific Islanders, sharing almost identical beliefs around crows with the first Americans, even with thousands of miles of ocean and several millennia between them. Not only did the crows bring the islanders and the Aboriginals fire and light, they also brought knowledge and are considered a deity of creation. Academics are nearly certain that Aboriginal religious traditions began forming around 65,000 years ago, making them by far the oldest entry in this video. Remarkably, these beliefs have remained largely unchanged since the first people set foot in the land down under. What's even more intriguing is that despite being separated by vast distances and millennia, Aboriginal and Native American cultures share strikingly similar views on crows and ravens, both deeply embedded in oral traditions that have endured for thousands of years. In fact, scholars argue that these oral histories are often more consistent and reliable than many of the written records from ancient Greece and Rome. So how do two distinct cultures, thousands of years apart and at opposite ends of the earth, tell a story of crows bringing them light, fire, and wisdom? Crows that are infinitely wise as they are mischievous. Across time and cultures, crows are consistently linked to wisdom, light, and the passage between life and death. Separated by centuries, sometimes millennia, the story remains the same. Like the Great Flood, giants, creation myths, and sea monsters, some themes echo through history, but no creature appears as often or with such striking similarities in its endless retellings as the sinister yet revered crow, an enduring symbol of death, wisdom, and light. The crow's history and the questions that arise around them have always, and will always, keep them the heart of myth, legend, and imagination, even in the modern age. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and share. Your engagement keeps the vortex moving, where myth, legend, and reality collide.